And now your True Adventure host, Bill Burrud.
Hi there, this is Bill Burrud saying welcome to adventure. True adventure filmed as it happens throughout our fascinating world. Did you know that there are glaciers in Africa? When you stop to think about it, there's some pretty high mountains there. And not long ago, an American decided he had to be the first man to conquer all 15 African peaks more than 16,000 feet high. From the plains and jungles of the Dark Continent, we're going along with him on the most exciting, colorful of those climbs, the Rwenzori, the Mountains of the Moon, Mount Kenya, and the two tallest peaks of Kilimanjaro. This is the most spectacular mountain climbing adventure in African history, and one of the most extraordinary accomplishments of its kind anywhere in the world. When someone asked the famous English mountaineer, George Mallory, why he felt he had to climb a certain peak, he gave the classic answer: because it's there. That was challenge enough. John D. Graham, a retired businessman, age 63, answered the challenge of Africa's highest peaks and climbed from the jungles to the glaciers in an exciting and dramatic true adventure. There's a special magic about Africa. It has a background of drama and excitement that goes back to the days of exploration when men were still looking for the sources of the Nile. There's spectacular wildlife even on the roads and highways, and parts of the continent still challenge anyone who's looking for adventure. Above the plains, above the scattered Maasai and the Samburu villages, tower the peaks of highest Africa. One of the most extraordinary achievements in the history of true adventure begins here in East Africa. For the mountaineer, the greatest challenges are the Rwenzori Range, Kilimanjaro, and Mount Kenya, because their peaks include the 15 highest in all Africa. John D. Graham's ambition: conquer them all, starting with the Rwenzori. The lower part of the trail to the foot of Mount Stanley is well traveled by wild animals, some of them dangerous, and the Graham expedition carries no guns. The Rwenzori Range is 60 miles long and 30 miles wide. It has 10 peaks over 16,000 feet, and yet its existence was unknown to the modern world until the journalist explorer Henry M. Stanley discovered it in the year of 1888. Annual rainfall here averages about 200 inches. In fact, Rwenzori, the name Stanley gave the mountains, is a native name meaning rainwater. The rain makes for rough going. It also accounts for the giant lobelia and other flowers growing on the mountainside. This is Lake Bujuku at 13,000 feet. Bujuku Hut, near the lake, is to be Jack Graham's base camp. From here, 20 of the porters return to their village, and the climb begins in earnest. The remaining party now includes Jack Graham, retired American businessman, Felix Julen, a Swiss Army captain, an expert climber, Dolph Riest, also from Switzerland. He climbed Mount Everest in 1956, plus 7 porters and their head man, Simony. The assault on the first peak begins early next morning. This is Speke Glacier, named after the English explorer John Hanning Speke. The Rwenzori live up to their reputation for bad weather. Graham has to climb to the top of Mount Speke in a snowstorm. And this isn't only in Africa. It's in the heart of the tropics, almost on the equator. Summit of Mount Speke. It took 3 hours to climb the glacier, but only 30 minutes to run down it. On Mount Stanley, there are 9 peaks over 16,000 feet. 2 of them weren't even discovered until 1956. No one has ever climbed all of them, but the attempt to do just that begins with a hike from Lake Bujuku to Elena Hut, which is perched 14,800 feet up the side of Mount Stanley. Unusual tropical plants grow clear to the foot of the glaciers, and that's as far as the barefoot African porters can go. Still, supplies for the assault on the Stanley Peaks have to reach Elena Hut somehow, so Jack, Felix, and Dolph Reist double up. It's bitterly cold at Elena Hut, which isn't surprising. This is higher than the Matterhorn, and the first climb begins in a blizzard. Their destination, the summit of Alexandra. Alexandra is covered with snow and solid walls of ice. The danger of falling ice cornices breaking loose and avalanching down is always with them. The first of the Stanley Peaks is conquered, Mount Alexandra. This is to be a great day of mountain climbing. After a 3-day layover caused by impossible weather, Jack, Felix, and Dolph, with the camera, set out across the Elena Glacier. They climb Mount Elena, also the Great Tooth, Savoia, and Mount Elizabeth. This is the approach up the north side of Mount Phillip. There's a snow and ice couloir, or gully, that leads all the way to the summit. At the top of Mount Phillip, in one day they've climbed 5 peaks all over 16,000 feet. The start of a new day, the first day of clear sunshine. Starting across the Stanley Glacier, the men have a perfect view of Alexandra and Margherita in the distance. Today's main objective, Mount Margherita, the highest peak in the Rwenzori. It was named in honor of the Queen of Italy, when the Duke of Abruzzi led the first successful expedition into the Rwenzori in the year of 1906. But even getting to Margherita poses a rather special problem for Jack Graham and his friends. The best way to reach it is over the summit of Mount Alexandra. So up the sides of Alexandra they go once more. This means climbing an ice wall that blocks their way to the east ridge leading to the summit. Icicles 10 to 20 feet long, almost on top of the equator. summit of Alexandra, 16,749 feet. It's the Rwenzori's second highest peak, climbed again because it's the easiest approach to Margherita, the highest peak of all. Now down the steep north face of Alexandra, toward the saddle between Alexandra and Margherita. They start up the steep gully on the south side of Margherita. Margherita, the highest peak on Mount Stanley and the highest in the Rwenzori. But even this isn't enough of an achievement for one day. There are still two other peaks above 16,000 feet on Mount Stanley, Nebius and Albert. And before the day's over, Jack Graham has climbed them too. Then all 10 Rwenzori peaks over 16,000 feet have been conquered by one person for the first time. Even so, this true adventure in highest Africa is far from over. The highest peaks of all are still to come. Kilimanjaro is Africa's highest mountain, with Mount Kenya as runner-up. North of Kilimanjaro sprawls the tribal home of the Maasai, whose warriors once dominated most of Kenya and Tanganyika. These aristocratic people are indifferent to civilization. They're convinced that their way of life is superior to anything the modern world can offer. For them, the good life is here, in East Africa's wilderness. For Jack Graham, visiting the Maasai is only a prelude to adventure. His expedition is on its way to climb Kilimanjaro's topmost peaks, Mawenzi and Kibo. There's Mawenzi in the distance. From Marangu at 4,500 feet, it takes him 3 days to climb to the shelter at the foot of Mawenzi. The elevation here is already 15,000 feet. Next day at sunrise, the party starts out. Although Mawenzi isn't the highest peak on Kilimanjaro, it's by far the hardest to climb. It calls for alpine climbing with ice axe, rope, and crampons. There's no way to bypass this gendarme or pinnacle, so over the top. In the background, there's the summit of Kibo, the target for tomorrow. They're approaching the top now after 4 hours of climbing from the Mawenzi Shelter. Mawenzi's jagged peaks, formed by ancient volcanic action. The summit of Mawenzi, 16,496 feet up, the fourth highest peak on the continent of Africa. Here's a register left by an earlier expedition. Members of the Sierra Club of California, a long way from home, above the African clouds. Next objective, Mount Kibo. Next morning, Jack and his party leave the Mawenzi Shelter to hike 7 miles across the high saddle to Kibo Hut, probably the highest in the world. Leaving the Kibo Hut at 2:20 next morning, they arrive at Gilman's Point in time for sunrise at 6 a.m. Here, they're on the rim of a crater at 18,635 feet. But Kibo's real summit is on the higher ridge beyond. There's a Sierra Club register here, too. From Gilman's Point, the summit is only 1.25 miles further around the crater rim. And it's only 705 feet higher There are no technical climbing difficulties. You don't even need rope, ice axe, or crampons. Just the same, perhaps 80% of the people who try to climb Mount Kibo have to turn back at Gilman's Point, or even sooner, because of the altitude. Kibo has defeated some of the world's best climbers. Snow, ice cliffs, and icicles on Kilimanjaro, only 3 degrees south of the equator. At the top of Kaiser Wilhelm Spitze, the summit of Kibo on Kilimanjaro. This is literally highest Africa. There's nothing higher. 19,340 feet high. Kilimanjaro has been conquered. Thompson Falls in Kenya. It's not far from the Samburu district, home of the Samburu tribes people. This is a closed area. In order to visit this village on his way to Mount Kenya, Jack Graham has to get special permit from the government at Nairobi. From the Samburu district, Jack travels to the farm of an Englishman named Raymond Hook. Hook has provided transport for most of the expeditions to Mount Kenya for 30 years. But this time, it's taken months to get permission to make the climb. Why? Well, Mau Mau terrorists are still hiding out in the forests on Mount Kenya, so this too is a closed area. Over 13,000 feet. This high in the Alps, you'd most likely find the hillside covered with snow and glaciers, but not in Africa. This hut at the foot of Mount Kenya is higher than the summit of Mount McKinley, but Jack's base camp is to be Top Hut, 1,000 feet higher yet. Batian and Nelion, the twin peaks of Mount Kenya. There's the route for climbing Nelion. There's always an early start. Base camp here at Top Hut is at 15,800 feet, higher than Mont Blanc, the highest peak in the Alps. Jack and Felix start across the Lewis Glacier to climb the southeast face of Nelion. And that's where they're going. This is the start of the actual ascent. Batian, incidentally, was first climbed by Sir Halford Mackinder in 1899. But this peak, Nelion, wasn't conquered until 1929. Here's a very difficult spot. Easy now. Still quite a way to go. Inch by inch, up the side of the rocky core of an ancient volcano laid bare by erosion. Nearly there now. Even below the summit, there's quite a view. Altogether, they're surrounded by a 300 square mile area at an elevation of over 11,000 feet, set aside as a mountain national park. And they've made it, the summit of Nelion, 17,022 feet, Africa's third highest peak. There's a register to sign up here, too. In order to climb both the twin peaks in a single day, they'll have to attempt the traverse from Nelion to Batian. This is a maneuver you can only try in good weather, and it's highly dangerous even then. Most parties are turned back here. You can see why. Well, at least the weather's perfect. The rest will be a matter of nerve and skill. And there's a peak over there no American has ever climbed. This is the dangerous Gate of the Mists. Jack is starting to rappel down the sharp ridge to the head of the Diamond Glacier. One slip here would mean a 1,000-foot drop. Now to cross the Diamond Glacier. The final step is a climb up the rock ridge to the summit. At 17,052 feet, Batian is the highest peak on Mount Kenya, the second highest in all Africa. And John D. Graham is the first American ever to climb Batian and to conquer Mount Kenya. Highest Africa, the Rwenzori, the peaks of Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya. For the first time, all 15 peaks above 16,000 feet have been climbed by one man. The continent that's been drawing men into adventure for generations has done it again. Africa is still there, exciting and spectacular, waiting for whoever may be next to answer the call to true adventure. Well, it was certainly a thrill sharing the experience with John D. Graham of climbing in highest Africa, these peaks that we saw. But you know, his friends call him Jack, so I think I'll call him Jack and ask him, first of all, when did you first start climbing mountains, Jack?
Bill, I started climbing the high peaks in Colorado in 1936 at the age of 40. I also started skiing at that time. So you see, life begins at 40.
Well, you're a living example of that, Jack. How many peaks have you climbed? Have you ever taken count?
During the past 26 years, I have climbed 120 peaks over 14,000 feet in various parts of the world. In this country, the classification of high peaks is over 14,000 feet, while in the Alps, it is over 4,000 meters. I have also climbed over 100 peaks under 14,000 feet.
Gee, that's tremendous. What about the greatest thrill that you've ever had in climbing mountains?
Well, Bill, I've had lots of thrills in climbing. Maybe my greatest thrill was climbing all 23 peaks over 14,000 feet in the Alps in one summer. It was the first time that all the highest peaks had been climbed in one season.
Gosh, that's a tremendous experience, Jack. But what about the most strenuous climb that you've ever had?
On account of the very heavy loads that had to be carried up the mountain, the sudden storms, the sub-zero weather, and the high altitude, my most strenuous climb was North America's highest peak, Mount McKinley in Alaska, elevation 20,320 feet, which I climbed at the age of 65.
Well, John D. Graham, you have certainly found the fountain of youth. I want to thank you, Jack, for being on our show, and I want to thank you out there for sharing with us this true adventure. Until we meet again, this is Bill Burrud saying, may all your adventures be happy ones.